everybody. Welcome back to Midwest Chicana segment that we have here. And this has been a topic of conversation for a couple of us for a while now. And I am so grateful to have the amazing women that I have here tonight. And I'm so excited for you all to meet them. And I'm sure you all know them already. So I would love to absolutely, first of all, thank Diosselyn for being back with us again as co-host and for helping navigate this amazing topic that we're about to talk about. So how are you doing tonight, Diosselyn?
I'm doing good. Getting excited to see what the conversation leads to and what examples we come up with as well. But hopefully also solutions on making sure that we encourage everybody to continue pushing forward no matter what.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we always seem to end up talking about and getting to that point. And that's why we have these amazing guests with us tonight. And they're not just guests, they're like sisters. So we've all kind of just started doing these podcasts together. Lucero is back. How are you, Lucero, tonight?
I'm doing great. I had a really wild weekend. My dog got into one of my plants and it turns out that it was toxic and he had to go to the vet.
Oh
but he is fine. He's good. So it was pretty crazy, but I'm happy to not be dealing with that anymore.
I'm so glad that he's doing all right. My God.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you had your amazing book. I mean, I'm just going to have to keep telling everybody, Book of Poems. That was like number one and
Yes.
your lives. And you had your mentor on that you were hopefully going to have her here tonight. But I know things went really fast. But can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my book, Soy Mujer, was published on the 1st of August. So it's about 2 weeks now that it's been available. You can purchase it by the link on my Instagram bio or Facebook. It's pretty much a compilation of poems, 31 poems in both English and Spanish that talk about the wonderfulness and beautiful aspects of being a woman. In all of her glory. And so it's a project that it's dear to my heart, and I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. So I'm really thankful and blessed to have had the opportunity to do it. I self-published, and that was not easy, but it's happening, and I'm so thankful for all the support, overwhelmed by it. And let's just keep it coming.
So excited and honored to have you here, have your voice here always. So we're just so excited to have you tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Susana, thank you so much for being here tonight. This is our first podcast together, which I'm excited about because I've been watching you from afar. Because as everyone knows, Edgar Palacios is our board chair for Latino Arts Foundation, and you are the COO of Latinx Education Collaborative, and you do so much more. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susana Elizarraraz. I am the Chief Community Officer of the Latinx Education Collaborative. We have a lot going on in the LEC, so my hands are all over the place right now, but I am an educator. I spent 6 years in a public school district here locally. I made the pivot to nonprofit work after you try to do the infiltration thing and be a part of a system to change it, and then you're like, whew, stuff starts to mount up. How many things need to be changed? So made the pivot over to nonprofit, and I'm loving it. Serving Latinos is part of my passion, but really being able to be on the outside of what a little bit of what we're talking about today, the systemic oppression that oftentimes the school system and institutions can have on our lives. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be in community with such strong people.
Well, and tell us a little bit about your new podcast. Is it a podcast or a segment that you're going to do? So tell us a little about that so we can have some viewers stop by.
I am so excited because Dr. Erica Hernandez Scott is I don't know, is she my alter ego / inspiration. She was my professor at UMKC at the Institute for Urban Education, where I graduated from. And she is just a really down to earth, a very real person. And I love that. I love me some honest, real people. So starting tomorrow, every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m., we're going to hold a segment where she, as an expert in urban education, and me as little me are going to get questions from educators about like, what did you not learn in your teacher preparation programs? Because any educator, Lucero, we could tell you like some of us were really failed by the teacher preparation programs that we were in. And, we could go all into that, but we wanted to really just make it a simple place for people to be like, okay, look, I have this kid in my class who blah, 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 blah. What do I do? I'm desperate. I need advice for tomorrow, because if not, I'm going to like pop off, So starting tomorrow, we're going to provide that, like almost like a free, class, like raise your hand and like, what do I do if blah, blah, blah. So yeah, feel free to join us tomorrow at 6.
We will definitely be there tomorrow for sure. And Diosselyn, thank you so much, Susana. I appreciate that so much. We appreciate you being here and all the amazingness. And Diosselyn, do you want to talk about real quick about the mural group that you just met that were inspired and knew about with the mural projects that you used to do in Kansas City, Kansas?
Yes. So, oh man, it is a little bit heartfelt touch story for me. So about 10 years ago, we started the mural project. I was about 14, 13, around that age, and we started doing murals by tagging in our community, and we did it in alleyways. So, fast paced forward, we are now here doing different community services. There was 4 of us in the art squad, so we all either became teachers. We do something in community service, organizing, and also advocacy, which is very interesting. However, we always had this, project to our heart. Is something that was just it was that creation of us, right? It was what brought us together. It's what helped us express. It's what exposed us to the community. So I've been always, advocating for murals, saying we should do murals. We could use the arts for the community to enhance it. I'm a big advocate for that. So when I can, I actually give mural tours. So every summer, I do the mural tours with different groups. And we have a great partnership here in Urban Works with Snack Shack and Youth Front. And they bring us volunteers each year. And they bring us groups. And this time they have a group in Argentina who they actually developed the whole Snack Shack. So every summer they have certain group of kids that come in and they develop a plan for the community to enhance it. So they get to tour the community, they get to see role models, they get to think about community issues, and then choose a project that they're going to focus on and develop it out. So after they get exposed to different things, they decided to do the murals this year. And for the first time, they invited me, and I did not know what I to expect, to be honest with you. But once we got there, they took me on the tour. They showed me their first mural. And then the biggest part that touched my heart was that they went to go to their second interview with their neighbors. And it was asking them about their story, asking them what has been going on. And honestly, it was just so amazing to see, because it brought back that memory when we were knocking on doors, asking our neighbors, how have you been? What are some things that you want to express? And it was such an amazing story that we heard from the neighbor that it was great to see that generation now continuing that. And now they're doing it in Argentina, which is a whole different neighborhood that we've, ever touched. And that's the cool thing. It's just seeing that other neighborhoods can replicate it and just, develop their own story. So that was pretty awesome. Sorry, I went too deep in that.
No, this is what this platform is for, and definitely giving the intro to our community of not just the amazing work that you all do, but like the influence that you all have on generations before us. Because when Diosselyn told me that, she didn't even know that this was happening or how this started, but just people are watching, even though you don't think they are truly watching. And I'm just so excited for all of you, for all the adventures and amazingness. Like I get like chills thinking about it. I'm like, I'm just hearing this podcast, like holding this conference, but like all you all are doing this amazing work. So I'm excited to have you here. So we'll kick off our topic. That's a little bit on the opposite of all this amazingness, but definitely needs to be talked about because as a CEO myself, who is Chicana and representing the Latino and Chicano community in Kansas City, I have hit walls and barriers, especially in spaces where it feels like these racist regimens are happening, and it's like people see it, they know it's there, but it's almost like it's so built into the system that there's no way out. Like even if you had all the possibilities of getting out, it's almost as if there's something there always holding them back to keep them there, whether that's money, whether that's, your board, just whatever it is. And for me, coming in and new to this and seeing it, it's just brought in a whole new lens of what, at least in my area, not-for-profit means and what we're serving, because for me, it's all about serving the community. But what I've been told is if you go against the norm, who are you really serving? Are you serving your community? Well, I feel like going against the norm and you feel like I don't serve the community, I'm not serving the community by going by the norm either. So I guess either way, there's no real goodness, it almost feels like. So I'd love to jump off and get the conversation started. So whoever wants to start first, platform is open.
And I think I'll go first. So I was just talking to you guys a little bit ago about what I think about what this means to me. And honestly, when I think about that, I was actually talking to a couple friends, and it always came up on just how sometimes something good, something that wants to be good or, has the outcome to be good, can be a little bit limiting. Because it goes back to like, what are the rules? Are you pissing somebody off, that can potentially come back and say, no, you're not doing this? Are you stepping on somebody's ground per se? Is there a certain thing that you cannot say, but you feel like you should say? What does that transparency look like? There's so many things that come up to my head that I could think of that sometimes, even though the systems are wanting to do good, they're still very limiting. And I don't know, I'm just going to kick it off like that and see what you guys want to add to that.
Yeah, that specifically makes me think of what at my job we've been trying to reassess and reinvent pretty much in our teaching. So I'm a 6th grade teacher at a charter school here in Kansas City, Missouri. And a lot of the times, specifically charter schools, can have the right intent, but then the impact is something different. And so like what I'm hearing you say is that like there's oftentimes these great organizations and great like groups of people that want to do something great and, have all the right intentions, but in the end, the impact, whether it's in the community or the people they serve or like the immediate like partners who are in that group, it doesn't end up being that. And what matters in the end really is the impact and not the intent. It's the same thing when, people make comments or they make, assumptions. It's like, oh, but I didn't intend it to be that way. Doesn't matter. It came across that way and the impact, it was already made. And so I think a lot of the times with organizations specifically that are either go into communities of color that are like birthed from like the community itself can have the right intentions, but then oftentimes the impact can be detrimental to like the community itself or to the very group that they're trying to uplift because of the limitations it provides in either like jobs, who's going to actually be able to work at this organization that's said to, help the community, who's it actually going to like benefit tax wise, all that sort of stuff. So I really think that like the term like impact over intent is super important to like know in any like sector of like social justice work that you're doing, whether it's education or it's nonprofit work or it's like community service and stuff like that.
When it comes to education, as a teacher, this like I could go on and on because we unfortunately profit off of the marginalization of kids of color. And it all starts with discipline and the way we discipline students, right?
Yeah.
The intention, like Lucero said, is providing them structure or, giving them a consequence. But when you think about the long-term impacts of discipline on kids of color, particularly boys and particularly Black boys, and how disproportionately they're disciplined in schools really has long-term effects. this is like, I will nerd out on this, but like it goes back, or really it goes back, right, pre-slavery times and all of that. But for the sake of time, the war on drugs that started in the 80s, 90s, early 90s, like saw the start of for-profit prisons. And so what started to happen then was people were incarcerated, and every person makes prisons money. And so we can go more into that, but really how that impacts kids of color long term, and how ultimately someone is profiting off of the marginalization of others.
So what I see here is definitely, we see it happening, right? We're understanding, we're learning. Some of us may know more than others in regards to it. So this isn't something new. It's been around forever. For me, it's like, how do we influence it? How do we pivot it? How does that happen? And that is something that I'm just being in the world just a year and a half in the not-for-profit world. That's been my constant thought process. Every time I meet somebody, every time that I learn about an organization, every time that, even social media, it's just funneling every single day on how we impact it enough to where there's real change. Because we can talk about it all day long, and I feel like so many people have, and it's like, what is really happening to make that pivot? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I think at its base, you could just look at the language that you use to get any information across. The language that's in your mission, the language that is in your flyers that you give out, the language on your website, just the language you use in the work environment to describe whatever it is you're describing, the communities you're serving. If it's from a deficit mindset, then it's always going to be a negative impact. But if it's from a additive, growth mindset type of situation, that we try to instill in our students, and as just human beings, we should always just keep a growth mindset, then it's going to hopefully have a better impact and go actually with the intent that it was begun with. So I think just the smallest thing that ultimately has a big impact that can be an immediate fix could be just the language you use every day, because we know that words have power. Just because words have the power to describe identities, have the power to uplift and to tear down at the same time.
I absolutely love that you said that, because I think that's so important, and that's something I'm learning now. Even with the help of mentors like Edgar, the people in my community that are doing the work as well, the language, because I come from a trauma-filled experience, and I come from a world of the support wasn't there, and you're angry. And when you get to this place where you're supposed to be supporting others, that anger doesn't go away. It actually amplifies and becomes this fire, because you're like, I don't want any kid to have to go through what I went through. And why are they going through that? I'm watching it happen to them when I'm in this place that I'm supposed to be protecting them and I'm supposed to be supporting them, but I don't have the power to even do that. So I love that you said that. Do you have any guidance, or any of you have any guidance in regards to when people don't know how to use that, or how to begin that whole healing process to be able to support others in that way?
I think, and there's many ways that I could think of this. So I'm going to apply it to the immigration work that I did. So one of the things was the word illegal versus the word undocumented, right? And that was something that it was just continuing to say it, undocumented, 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 until they get it. It's unfortunate to say that you have to repeat it so often. It's unfortunate to say that you have to explain it so often as well, but it goes back to opening up those doors. It goes back to changing that language little by little. This little action then starts making them realize that they're one of the things that I would always say, they lack papers. They're not aliens, so it's undocumented. And as soon as that would make it more relatable, I think people made it more personal. They made it more humane. They saw it they started maybe they didn't see it in a different perspective, but they started to be willing to listen, at least, and open their mind. That's just an example that I can think of right off the bat.
I think it starts with authenticity and being genuine. Because when you tap into your authenticity, what's going to happen is your biases and your stereotypes are going to come to the forefront, are going to come to the surface. So when I'm functioning in a space, an education, any kind of service space, education, nonprofit, I need to walk into that space wanting to be as authentic as possible. So what that's going to do is make me ask questions like, how do I approach people? How do I talk to people? How do people approach me? Is there a problem with these things? And in those little details, you're going to start to realize, wait, why is it that every time I say blah, 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 X, Y, Z, this is the result and that's not the result I'm wanting? Or why is it that my Latinx students are more likely to come to me for help rather than my white or my Black students, right? So when you start to be authentic within yourself and identify your own biases and stereotypes, then you'll start to be like, realize where you're actually perpetuating stereotypes yourself, because honestly, we're all doing it. We all do it, and it's not something to be ashamed about. No one is blaming anyone. But Deanna, you mentioned the often toxic and traumatic childhoods or experiences that we come into these spaces with. A lot of times, those toxic spaces grow biases and stereotypes. Meaning, an example being that children who grow up in domestic violence are more likely to be in abusive relationships, right? And so unless I identify, hey, this element of my life is something that I really don't like, and something that I grew up with and that I thought it was right or normal at one point, but I need to do the work within myself to make sure I'm not entering a service space with those biases and stereotypes. Now, if you want to own a business or be somebody's financial whatever, I mean, I think they, should be doing the work as well. But especially in this service space, you got to do the work, and it's ugly and it's sad and it's scary and it makes people angry. So makes yourself angry. Hey.
And I will add on, is just being able to hear those no's and not letting it stop you either, making sure that every time somebody defies you or somebody questions what you're doing, it's just reminding yourself that it goes back to, it's not even you, it's their insecurities, it's whatever they're going through, it's whatever they have in their mind that they want to make you feel the same way that they're feeling. And that's the biggest things that I always kind of keep in mind. It's just not taking anything personal. And if it was meant to be challenging, I definitely welcome it. I am that person that I'm like, okay, that's okay. I'll say okay to you, but then I'll go back and be like, yeah, I'm going to turn around and do this somewhere different. And some of the things that I used to do too is, I wouldn't say that you need to do this all the time, but sometimes I would ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. I would just say, oops, sorry, I didn't realize that I could do this, but guess what? The outcome was exactly what we wanted. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to get it unless I had to do it that way. And yes, there were certain things that I could have avoided if I went by the rules, but it wasn't until I defied those rules that things started changing.
And sometimes the rules that have been put in place doesn't mean that they're correct. I mean, because at one point, slavery was legal, doesn't mean it was right. And so, if we do a drastic kind of a comparison of just something like slavery and it being legal at one point in the United States, but still being wrong, and then maybe a organization wide held belief or something, or a rule that you're not supposed to break, it kind of becomes the same thing. It's like, all right, so why do we have this in place? Who is this actually serving? What is the impact? Is there a better way to do this? And if so, why haven't we done it? Why haven't we started talking about it? Why haven't we challenged it? And so it's interesting because I, in my essence, in my, unrefined self, I will follow like the rules, and like I'm like a people pleaser in like my most unrefined self. Like I will just want to like make people happy and like do what it is it needs to be done to keep the peace. Like, and I realized that because that's like was my role in my family growing up. Like I was a peacekeeper for everybody. I was in between everything. I was the one who had to keep it together. And that came at a cost of like literally biting my tongue and not speaking up for myself and being quiet. And then I realized that when you go into workspaces like that, just like Deanna was mentioning, like you come from these spaces of trauma, or you come from like childhoods that were projected as one way, but then you realize you're like, that was really messed up. It shouldn't have happened, but dang. So, and then you're just realizing it as an adult when maybe you're having a conversation with a coworker, or for some reason what somebody said rubbed you the wrong way, and you're like, I don't know why. And it comes with that. And just like Susana said, it's ugly work. It is not glamorous at all. That's why a lot of the times, like stuff like education and like doing the dirty work is not what people want to do. People want to be out protesting, which is what we need. We need that. I'm not saying don't do that. Like I'll be the first one to like, go out there, but that's all like forefront. And we have to think back and know that that's not going to get us like to where we need to get fully. Like we have to be, in law, we have to be doctors, we have to be teachers, we have to be, nonprofit, organization of founders, and being deep in the community, being looked down upon and often being questioned. But it's like, hey, we're doing this work and it's long term and it's going to kick our butts. But like, there's going to be some like, return from that. And even then there's just, you have to do like a whole bunch of like unmasking and like uprooting of like, systems that were once good in the moment, but they've evolved into something different. And the way that the earth evolves and like the community and our beliefs, like the same thing has to happen with just, goals and missions and all that stuff. So it remains relevant.
Absolutely. And I love being the vulnerable one here because I think when I was, before I was in this space, I was the one outside looking in and not really seeing people like me, especially now doing the work that in the work in the area that I'm in right now, no degree, no piece of paper to say I was ever a part of a not-for-profit in any sort of capacity ever. And having to funnel that and figure out how to make it work, right? You have the passion, you have the drive, and how to make it work. So I know there's a lot of younger people out there that are kind of in the same position I'm in right now that I get, messages from, like, how did you start this? How did you do it? I have the community for me, but then there's like these top people that, don't want to see me here or are working really hard not to get me here. And so just these conversations are so vital for the ones that are trying to do the work now, that I feel like hearing these conversations over and over, you can get here. It doesn't have to be the journey I had, but it can definitely be even a better journey, a smoother journey in some sense. But there is always dirty work, 110%.
You know what? That dirty work, if it hasn't been done by people who are leading others, the people who are being led are being done a disservice. Because if you are still perpetuating biases and stereotypes while leading others, that's dangerous and it gets people killed. And it is your responsibility as a leader, Deanna, Lucero, Susana, Diosselyn, like all of us who lead anybody, it's our responsibility to break down those biases and stereotypes. And let me tell you, I'm going to tell you a quick story of how uncomfortable it is, because most of us don't like to say sorry and admit that we were wrong. But I had a friend in college who was a Latina, but she didn't speak very good Spanish. And I grew up in a neighborhood where it was majority Mexican American, majority first generation. And if you didn't speak Spanish, you weren't Mexican. If you didn't speak Spanish, you were not a Latina. So you had to find another group to be a part of. I mean, it is what it was. And I don't know, who really run, we don't run the neighborhood. Why are we being like that? But it was just how I grew up, And so I went to college, and the fact that I was shunning the only person that was a Latina who I could even remotely relate to just shows how much white normative structures and characteristics of white supremacy are so deep rooted inside of us. So I would tell her, like, really, you don't know how to speak Spanish? Like, that's kind of embarrassing. Like, I would talk stuff. And when I started moving into this equity work in nonprofit, I went to a session at UMKC with Solisa McKay, and she was talking about anti-Blackness. And in this session, the whole time, I'm like, I think I'm gonna have to make a call to this girl, because now I feel so bad, because she was Puerto Rican and Mexican, and she was shunned in her like in her circles, because she didn't feel like she fit in with Latinos, and her hair was curly and she was a little darker. So I was like, I'm perpetuating these systems. No. But it was really uncomfortable, because I was like, man, like, I don't even know if she remembers. Like, she's going to be like, girl, what are you talking about? Like, we were friends. But I did it. I texted her and I was like, hey, you know, I am no gatekeeper of Latinos, and I really shouldn't have been acting like I was, because I am nobody, and I shouldn't have been making you feel less than at all in any aspect. As a woman, as a Latina, as whatever you identify as, that's not my place. I could not continue with my equity work knowing that hypocrisy was a part of my identity. Like, you're going to be in las redes, right? Like, in these spaces where you're on live and you're on StreamYard and you're on Facebook Live talking about equity, when you've, jaded people with your biases and stereotypes. Like, that was not a fun conversation, and it was very awkward. But like, I knew that in order for me to do this equity work, I had to deal with the fact that I had perpetuated some of that. So,
did she know what you were talking about? Was it something that kind of traumatized her in some sense in any way?
She knew what I was talking about. I don't know if she downplayed it to make me feel better, but she was like, no, girl, don't worry about it. You know, I hear it all the time, kind of thing. And so I felt like she kind of downplayed it, probably to make me feel better. Again, a characteristic of white supremacy culture, right? Which is that, like, oh, don't worry about it, when really perhaps her feelings really were hurt, but maybe they weren't. Yeah. I don't know. But she forgave me and was like, we're both doing the tough work, and so, like, let's learn and grow. It's all we can do, Yeah. So I'm glad that was her response, and not like, yeah, I've been thinking about that every day of my life. And so I don't know, I was like scared. I didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I had the same experience in college. Like, that was this, like, similar to Susana. Like, I grew up in like a community where, like, you spoke Spanish, and if you didn't speak Spanish, like, you, like, what's up then? And I remember in college, the moment that, like, I realized, I'm like, who the hell do I think I am, trying to, like, say who is Latino enough, and I'm the one who's always saying that, like, oh, like, how dare they say that we're not, and I'm just like, look, I'm doing the same thing with Spanish. And then in the essence, when you really think about it, Spanish is not the original language, it's the colonized language too. And then that in and of itself, you're just like, oh no, I pride myself on that, and it's not even the actual thing, the original. So it's messy, and it hurts, because, like, you look at yourself and you're just like, oh, I gotta make some calls. I gotta really look inward. I gotta apologize. And no matter what type of person you are, as open, like, as, like, big of an influence or as small as an influence as you have, it stings. It stings to have to confront it. But once you do, you one, get over that hurdle, and two, like, you're just more credible in whatever work that you're doing, because it, one, shows the strength that you have in recognizing and in receiving feedback and all that stuff. And then you can just, move forward from that. So I got you, Susana, on that.
Yeah. So Edgar's probably going to say something here, because we talk about this all the time, because especially in the platform that I'm in right now, this constantly still happens to this day. So I grew up with that stereotype tagged on me. I was Mexican Barbie. I was coconut. never good enough on both. And I'm still in that space right now, still trying to figure this out because my husband's from Mexico. And so what it's always been in my experience, especially in high school, didn't go to college, but when I was in high school, and even the people that I hang around with in our communities, the people from Mexico never associated with the people that were Mexican American. That's just how it was. There were maybe very few in betweens that did, but both sides were like, we're better than you, like whatever. So even on our end, the superiority of that always shone through either way. It wasn't just one side or the other. But being in that space at the time, you're like, you feel that, right? You're like, I'm with this group. They're my family. They're coconuts too. That's what you're claiming. We all are. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of be with them. So to this day, I get messages from people all over the world in regards to that, not just being Mexican American, but just being the two cultures from all over the world. And it's very disheartening because, we're all people. When you have two cultures, it's phenomenal, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The embracement of that needs to start changing. And it feels like it's still not there yet, especially when you do get the unknowns that are like, you're never enough. They'll send me DMs in Spanish. They know I can't. Well, if I do Google, I can't translate it, and they're just like, haha, I knew you weren't anything, like you're not Mexican, so it's a hard space to live in. I think especially since I have this platform and you can see it more, and it's more visible. Whereas before it's like, okay, just people in your community, got it. I figure, it's not going to change, or maybe it will. But yeah, that is something that I'm still dealing with to this day. And I applaud you both for, stepping up and realizing that and apologizing, because I feel like that's such a big thing. That's something that's not happened with me, with people that have done it to me. And, I have the blonde hair, I used to have high hair. People say I talk like a Valley girl, so, on this podcast, they're like, I hate the way you talk, it's like, okay, don't listen. But so it's a hard space to be in. So I applaud you guys for even bringing that up, for sure.
Yeah, and thank you, Deanna, for sharing that. I actually was gonna add on to it because I definitely think I'm reflecting on it now that you guys are started reflecting that. I'm like, how have I done it? And I think I think I've done it in several different ways, which I've noticed that I had in, like you guys said, it's recognizing it and being able to take control of figuring out how you handle it from here on out, or how do you grow? Because if you recognize it and you don't grow, then that's a whole another topic we can get into. But I think I like when I think I've seen it with somewhat. I'm from Guatemala, and there was a thing with me with Mexicans all the time. It was like, as soon as we found out Guatemala, they're like, oh, a lot of stuff were said. I would say certain things, and they would look at me like, what the hell are you saying? Because curly hair for me is colocho. It's not chino. So every time I would say it, they'd be like, what? And then there's certain things that I eat that people wouldn't eat, right? So there were several things that I had to learn at a very early age, and I found myself being angry at that. So every time, and my friends they would repeat this over and over. Every time somebody would call me Mexican, I would get so upset, and I'd be like, no, I'm not. I'm like, I'm Guatemalan. And I would like get super, 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 super mad. But that's the thing, though. That anger didn't help. That anger of me just kind of avoiding everything and just being mad and screaming at them didn't help. It wasn't until I started finally sitting down and just being like, okay, like, I'm not Mexican, you guys. Like, I'm from Guatemala. Can you guys say Hispanic, Latinos? And I'm not the best yet either. It's something that I have to practice all the time, and even catch myself and be like, all right, Diosselyn, you're getting to that point where you need to step back. And that was the other thing. Not only did I have to do it with my own community, but I had to learn how to do it with the Black community and the white community. I had to learn how to step back and just be like, okay, I'm assuming too much before I even start this conversation with this person, and I really had to like, honestly, I would have to step out of my office for 5 minutes and just be like, okay, breathe, put on that calm application, all these different things. So then I could come in with a clear mind, because it's truly, truly, truly right. You can be doing a disservice to a lot of people, especially if it's your own bias, your own anger, your own something that's limiting you from creating something even greater than, That's the thing, like you can miss out on huge opportunities if you can't grow from this. And I think that's the biggest things that I've learned. I had to really sit back, and that's how I'm able to speak to others too, because then I can be like, oh, I did this. Like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like my friends all the time, I'm like, please call me out. Like call me out on things that I say bad. When I mispronounce name, I'll be like, call me out, because I hate when people mispronounce my name. So how can I not pronounce somebody's name right? So there's so many different things that, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing progress that you will always, always be growing. I'm learning.
Hey, well, you know what? White supremacy and white superiority is not unique to America. It's not unique to the 1950s to now, right? It's not unique to the civil rights movement. It's not unique to slavery, to the American slavery, right? We are talking about, like Lucero touched on earlier, we're talking about centuries of white superiority, right? And so all of you have mentioned how in our own cultures, in our own communities, we have put others down, or maybe we've been put down because of the biases and the stereotypes that we've placed on people in our own communities. My mom is darker skinned, and even she perpetuates, and it was more in the past. Now that I'm in equity, I'd be like, Mom, that's not, like, we don't say that, but she was really self-negative, like self-talk to herself. And she would say, oh, gracias que mis hijos salieron blancos. Like, thank goodness my kids were born light skinned. And then my little brother was born, and he's a little more dark skinned. So she would say things like, ay, pobrecito, or, poor Lalito, he was born like his mom, When I was younger, it was like, oh, okay, I'm one of the pretty ones, But as I got older and now in education and in equity work, I really dissected, like, damn, that's not okay, and it's not, my mom didn't invent this herself, it was things that she was told as a kid. It was things that my grandparents thought. It was things that my great-grandparents thought. My mom will tell me things about how in her pueblo in Mexico, only a certain amount or group of girls would get picked to dance at the dances, and it would be the light-skinned girls, That comes from the history of colonization in Mexico and all across Central America and all across South America and all across the Caribbean and all across, right? Like Africa and Asia. And so first we have to give ourselves grace to be like, you know what? Like, no puedo regañar a mi mamá and be like, Mom, really? Like, don't talk like that, right? I have to give her grace, give my upbringing grace, give my ancestors grace to know that perhaps they didn't realize the effects that white superiority had on them, and then work forward. Like Diosselyn said, like, I can't fix the fact that my grandma, I mean, don't even get me started on my grandma, because the problematic, I love her to death, may her soul rest in peace, but man, like the sexist and, machismo that was spread in our family, right? But we can't blame, we have to give grace and then move forward once we learn better.
I think it's important to note, I mean, like, in the spirit of recognizing and being aware, I mean, we're all like light-skinned Latinas having this conversation right now. We're afforded this space. We're given more like following because of our light-skinned complexion. And even like we have to start, like, as Latinos, speaking just for Latinos in general, we have to stop thinking of like this notion of racism and this deeply embedded like white supremacist culture as like a United States problem, and like look inward. Because Diosselyn, when you were talking about like when people would assume that you're Mexican and you're like, I'm not Mexican, like I'm, soy de Guatemala. And it's I mean, in Mexico, there's this Mexican hegemony is rampant. It's like I when you were saying that stuff, I remember when like stuff as little as like soccer games. Like whenever Mexico would play El Salvador, it was always like, ha, like we're the bigger, better country beating the little tiny one. Like y'all could never type of situation. But then it would spread like farther out to where it's like, I went to El Salvador with a school trip in high school. And like, I was one of the only Spanish speakers there. And like a lot of the times, like, it was never like, oh, they confused me for being Salvadoran, but like in the slightest way, if they ever mentioned like, oh, I could do something like this, or like, oh, you're Salvadoran, or you're not from, like, you don't sound Mexican. It was just like, what do you mean? Like, I'm Mexican, like, I'm like, this is like who I am. And it's that deep rooted hegemony, basically meaning that like in the most layman's terms is like, you know, Mexico like appearing and believing that they're superior to the rest of the like Latino, Central American countries, when in reality, it's not. Like, you know, it's the same thing that Mexico was fighting the U.S. for in terms of like border security and border patrol, that we're doing that to Central Americans down like by the, you know, Yucatan and all that stuff. And it's the same thing, different story, same thing, different place. And so it's like, we have to stop thinking of it as a them issue and really be like, no, it's a us issue too. Like Susana mentioned, you know, colorism, like novelas, you know, who's on TV. You know, I love Ilia Calderon. She's like one of the few Afro-Latinas who is, you know, a TV personality. And she's so powerful and so gracious and stuff like that. And so I think like in like the spirit of just like what we're talking about and like why we're having this conversation, it's knowing that it's not just a them problem, even if you are a person of color, even if you are Black, even if you are Indigenous or LGBTQIA, like it's there, we all fall victim to this like white supremacy that is so deeply embedded with centuries and centuries that sometimes the stuff that we do, we don't even realize it. And something that we talked about today in one of our workshops at work is like the notion of perfectionism. Like, where does that come from? Like, that we think we have to like always be perfect. And that's the reason why sometimes we don't start things, because we're not perfect at it. It's like, it's okay with being mediocre. It's okay if like you like painting, but you're not an artist. Like, that's fine. So that was a lot, but yes.
So I'm so glad you guys are bringing this to me, because again, being vulnerable here and being that outside person looking in, I was not, you know, so for ours, and a lot of us in my community, we are not around enough people to talk the way you all talk to us. Like, I'm just going to say it in that kind of term. Like, we continue down our path, and it's kind of just who we are and what we've been. And without meeting you all within these last year and a half, I'm really going to say that, like, completely honestly, it still probably would be that. It would be, you know, I'm Mexican American, I'm Chicana. This is who I am, you know, do whatever you say to me, whatever. And it's always this you against me type of situation. And that's a really vulnerability here, because there's a lot of us sitting in that space right now. And I'm 44 and barely learning about the different ways that you can overcome this piece of your life, right? Because even with my own kids, this is happening, you know, like, you know, the abuelos, or, you know, the girls do the cooking and the cleaning, while my son, who's 11, sits on the couch and plays games, and they're questioning it. And it's that like, do you disrespect and say no, bring him in to cook too, which he does, and they praise him for it. You know, and the girls are just like, that's just your job, like, you just do that. And so it's just this whole thing of, you know, how do you stop it? And I love these conversations, because I think there's a lot of people out there like me who aren't hearing this enough, or don't know who to talk to in regards to these conversations, and how to change the mindset of what your path has been, right? So I appreciate you guys bringing the honesty and like the education to us. Okay, I'm gonna. Miguel wrote a really good. I didn't want to cover your guys' faces, so. As a monolingual English-speaking Latinx, the most difficulty I've experienced is not from Spanish-only speaking Latinx people, but rather bilingual Latinx who try to play our communities against each other in order to amplify their own importance. Spanish-only Latinx and English-only Latinx have a lot in common, and we can often find common ground because of language barriers. The problems start when a bilingual person inserts themselves uninvited between us, disrupting the flow. I agree 110% with that comment he just made, just because of you know, what I've experienced in my own background.
Language is like one little piece, and like this work toward equity, right? Because language, my master's is in teaching English as a second language, and if you really like dig deep into linguistics and like how it impacts the equity space, it's a really big deal. But every single element of equity, whether it's linguistics, whether it's colorism, whether it's history, right? Like all these parts of equity, that's not easy work. It's not easy. And Miguel was, touching on what we were talking about earlier with like us feeling as, again, like Lucero said, light-skinned Latinas, feeling like we can be like, you don't speak Spanish, you're not Latina enough, And it's like, first of all, Spanish is the colonizer language. But that's like something, like you have to be deep in your work to be able to say what I just said, to be able to say, even Spanish is a colonizer language. I bet you if I said this in front of some of my elders, my parents or my grandparents, they'd be like, girl, like, stop,
So I was going to stop you and say that's exactly the space that some of us are in right now, because I could never say that. And like when you say things that you and Lucero and Jocelyn are talking, it's like mind blown. Like absolutely agree with you 110%, but the ability to even have that thought process is like non-existent.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, because we come from backgrounds that are so resistant to change. I mean, really, resistance to change is a thing. I am so disappointed in myself that I haven't even mentioned the characteristics of white supremacy. But Lucero, you touched on them. Deanna, you mentioned something. The characteristics of white supremacy. One of them is like just this either or, which means like you're either this or you're that. When in equity, it means that there's a lot of possibilities on our identity. Intersectionality, like that in and of itself, we haven't even talked about that, and we could go all in on about intersectionality. But yeah, our families are resistant, and we start off resistant because of the ways that we're raised, right?
I'm gonna add on to that. The hardest work when I was doing immigration work, so we were teaching Know Your Rights. And I cannot tell you how hard I banged my head telling my parents to assist to this workshop. I'll be like, how is it that I am teaching this whole communities, but you guys don't go to these workshops to, one, first of all, support me, two, to learn it, because you never know who you can help out with this information. And I think, sorry about my dog. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just trying to figure out, how do you start these conversations with individuals who don't see the importance of, or have been so let down by the system that they don't even want to hear you anymore. Honestly, even with my parents, I've had to start calling them out. As soon as they do it, I start calling them out, and I'm like, why are you doing this? Like, this is not cool. My parents are pastors, so I go in and I start talking about the Bible and start talking about advocacy at the same time. I mean, I use anything and everything that I can, justify my point to. I would say the same thing with voting. I would say there's so many ways that honestly it's just having to be able to have those uncomfortable conversations. But when you do have those uncomfortable conversations, being able to have discussions, because often that's when we get heated, and that's when we no longer can.
And I think it's also sitting with the uncomfortableness, and realizing that in this hour conversation, we're not going to find like the solution. And being okay with that. And I think that's really hard, because that's also another aspect of like white supremacy. It's just like, again, either or. It's like, all right, so we're not going to talk about this because it can't be fixed, so it's not worth talking about. It's like, no, it has to be talked about, and it needs to be dissected. It needs to be dismantled, and it needs to be, first of all, in people's minds for even anybody to be aware that it's a problem. So, yep.
Well, I'm glad that you guys brought that up. And I love the point that you made, Diosselyn, because again, I'm here. I'm sure if there's anyone else out there in my situation, please comment, bring in a comment, whatever, like a question. But when you said the fact of support, I love that you brought that up, because that is the truest thing I've learned so far within this year and a half, is that, you think, first of all, your family is going to support you no matter 110%. You could be a trash person and they're going to be like, oh, hell yeah, do it. Right. I've always grown up to where, just like my own kids, support. But so I'm just gonna be completely honest here and just vulnerable. And I love being that person that can say the other side, and it's not always, like I love your amazingness here, but there's also people like me on the other side that are dealing with this daily. So the people that are supposed to be supporting me and don't do it in a way where they think the work is important. So on top of being a only Chicana CEO founder that comes with no education, that has lived her whole life as a coconut Mexican Barbie, that talks like a Valley girl, that doesn't talk in an educated way of people understanding, and now wants to serve her community in the arts. And I myself am not an artist, but that's part of my story, is that I never had the opportunity to do that. And so I want to ensure that the kids and the people that I'm serving now do have that opportunity. And I think for people in my spaces, they just feel like it's a waste of time. Your community is not going to support you. And who are you really serving? And some people say you're serving yourself. That's one big thing that comes across to me always, is you're serving yourself. And even when it comes to post and how I'm posting, that's all you. That's nothing to do with your community. And this isn't the way that it's supposed to be. So yeah, I love that you brought that up, Diosselyn, in regards to like even that little piece of what you said about your parents, because I don't have that where people are sharing things about the Latino Arts Foundation with the people I love the most. They're not. Being a CEO founder is not something that's important or feels like an accomplishment. And especially, so I think that's why I always come back to my journey and how I got here, because it was like, I mean, just like everybody else in my shoes, it's a hard journey to get here. Just, I'm sure your journeys were hard. We all have different paths. But that's part of, who I am, and trying to break down those walls. And if there's anybody else out there that at least can hear this and know you can do it, whether you feel like you're standing alone in this community of, not sure what to do, but you just know you have to do something, it can still happen. And so I think that's why even the podcast is so important to me, because it brings off the voices of people that I need to hear from, and know that there's a way to be better. There's a way to grow from this, whether or not you're just growing it on your own by yourself.
There's a, sorry, Diosselyn, there's a, again, the characteristics of white supremacy. Lucero mentioned it with productivity, which means that when we grow up in white normative standards, it's expected that we are constantly producing something. And that's really just not the case. When we talk about our ancestors and really the way that our people are, it's not necessarily the case, right? It's about the journey. Another characteristic of white supremacy, I always have the website up, it's bookmarked on my laptop, is the right to comfort, meaning that like we're constantly pressured to make sure everybody feels okay, to make sure everyone's feelings are safe. And you know what? There's going to be times when your feelings are hurt, especially in this work. Actually, if your feelings aren't hurt, most of the time in equity work, like you ain't really doing the work, because your feelings are going to be hurt. And so if you do have pushback on the way that you're running XYZ, this is what I tell Edgar, like, please feel free to come have a seat and help me with the work, because there's plenty of it. First of all. Second of all, it's my husband. Second of all, mind your business. But third of all, the third thing is power hoarding. You have to consider, and I know power hoarding is something that's been a common concept now, but even within Latinos, even within communities of color, white normative structures have told us that there's just this much power for people of color, so who's going to win it, when it's not true. You, Deanna, are providing service and exposure to people who are marginalized that would otherwise not get the exposure. And so if someone can do it better, invite them to the table. If someone can do it better, invite them to lead. Because it's not about us. It's about like the people who we're serving. And so the day that someone is like, Susana, I have a way better idea for Latinx Education Collaborative, or I have a way better idea for your classroom or whatever it may be, I'm gonna be like, cool, come show me. You know, power hoarding is a thing. And so that's something I would look out for.
I just want to like end off like with this, like it's something that like one of the few things that I like think I like actually learned in my sociology degree. Because honestly, I felt like every single time I was going to class, they were just like talking about my life. I'm like, I didn't know this. Y'all didn't know this. And so the one thing that I think that like everybody's has kind of mentioned, especially with like the power hoarding, is if we really like look at it in a macro way instead of like the micro way that we're used to with specifically like only Latinos or only women or anything like that in a very like kind of just like remote lens, then we're missing that what we're fighting over is the crumbs. What we're fighting over is like the bare minimum, what's left over. It's not even like the main source of the power. And so that's the point of like the dominant class of those people in power is for us to not see that we're fighting over like what's left, and we're not even getting close to like where the actual source is, where we need to do like the work, where like, you know, we need to send our people, where we need to be able to recognize I've gotten here, now let me bring it back to like, you know, the situation that I used to be in where I didn't get this information before. And so it's important to recognize, you know, I think it's just privilege that comes into this. Like my degree would mean nothing if I didn't like give back to my community, if I didn't take what I learned in those spaces and unlearned and bring it back into my home and bring it back into my kids in the classroom and bring it back into my own life. Like my degree would mean nothing. And like, you know, the BA would mean nothing behind my name if I didn't, you know, do that work. And if I elevated myself into thinking that I was better because of that, I'm just doing the same thing that I'm supposedly fighting against. And so again, it's messy work. It is not easy. It is hard. And just like, you know, Susana said, if your feelings aren't hurt, you're doing something wrong because you're not learning. You're not being open. You're not being authentic enough to like, you know, be called out. And it's important. Exactly. Embrace the discomfort. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Irene, for being here. Go ahead, Diosselyn. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I was actually just to finalize as well, because I don't know how much time we have. Honestly, Deanna, I think I was called. Maybe I did a different type of pathway. I'm not quite sure. My record was not the best. I was not the nicest little girl ever all the time. But, you know, when I was doing this work, I got a lot of backlash on people calling me weak because I care for others. I got backlash because I wasn't Hispanic enough, or because I wasn't too radical. I do advocacy, and I don't go out and protest, and I'm not loud, and I'm not all these different things, but I still do advocacy in a different way. We talk about outwork and the work internally, which is so different. I have a lot of intergenerational friends. That means I have a lot of older friends. So I used to hang out at the elderly homes and hang out with them all my like Friday mornings or Thursday mornings. And people would be like, why are you doing that? I had so much backlash, and it was my own people telling me that. And sometimes it really, really definitely hurt. It was the person that I consider my best friend at times, you know, and they were just bashing me down saying, you're not going to change anything. You're not going to do anything. You know, if I would have listened to them, I would have probably been nowhere. But that's the thing. I think the biggest thing is continuing to push, regardless of how much people doubt you, regardless of how much people tell you no, regardless of your age, regardless of everything. I'm always going to advocate for you to push through that, but always open up the doors for somebody else. Always make sure that there's somebody else that you're leading to being able to continue that work on. Because again, it goes back to representation, and there's a lot of areas that we still need to cover. And if we don't have people behind us, if we don't have people who are growing with us, then we're going to continue to stay stagnant, and we're going to continue to be the smallest group. And that doesn't help anybody. So I think when it goes to power, you know, you're going to meet a lot of people who are power hungry. You're going to meet a lot of people who are going to be like, you're a woman and you're doing this, and start doing a lot of things. Machismo is very real in the Hispanic community, super real. And you know what? Whatever, keep pushing through them. I was like, keep pushing through them. Don't let it get to them. It's going to be hard. It's going to be horrible sometimes, but there are going to be those people that you can call and talk to. There are going to be those people that you can have coffee with. There are going to be those people that you're going to be like, you know, you can go to them and you can probably cuss out them, and they'll be like, okay, let's talk about this. Yeah. So finally, you have them. And even when you are at your lowest and you want to cuss, I can tell you a lot of my mentors have heard me cry, have heard me do a lot of things, have heard me pace up and down, so many things. But the biggest thing is not letting them, even if you fall, don't stay down. When you fall, you're already fallen. There's no difference.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen when you get up. So, yeah.
You guys are amazing. Susana, do you have any last words for our community and myself?
You know, I think the biggest thing is, I mentioned it earlier, is just giving grace to yourself. You know, I hope that no one listened to this conversation and felt too much pressure to be there, be perfect, you know, because actually equity work is a journey, and it's absolutely not a destination. The world is always changing. Our country's changing. Kids are changing. Youth is changing. So give yourself grace. A lot of us maybe feel that we are the news givers for our families. We are the fact holders for our family, which is true a lot of times. But give yourself grace. It's a journey, and know that obviously there's a community for you to feel supported in, and be patient to those that come to you to feel support.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you guys, it kind of twisted into like a personal story. So I hope that helped a lot of people out there, because I think that's my gift. And I think myself and Edgar have talked this about a lot. Like, my gift is the empathy part, like just understanding the side that I've dealt with and still dealing with to this day, and bringing on the people that I know will have the views and the information and the willingness to share what you know. And that's why I have you on here. That's why I love the people that I have, because there may be people out there that don't know you. There may be people that needed this conversation right now that are like, wow, I never thought of that. Or, you know, maybe I should get in touch with somebody like yourselves to be able to grow. And that's the whole point of this podcast. It definitely is. And didn't mean to make it about myself, but I know there's a lot of people out there dealing with a lot of this, and it does have to go a lot with the feeding or healing, you know, the whole fact of this racist regimen that's going on, and the white supremacy, and all of that. So I just want to tell you guys, thank you so much for being here and spending a little bit more over the hour. We could talk about so much more and have your voices here forever. Like, I just appreciate all of you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having us and having me.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. So there's comments on there if you want to reach back out with anybody. Thank you, everybody, for commenting and bringing that voice. And we'll continue these conversations for a while. So just continue watching these, and watch Susana tomorrow. And then we also have our Latina Chicana podcast tomorrow too. So there's a lot going on tomorrow. Porterhouse KC, I'll shout out to them. They have theirs going on tomorrow too. So they have a really good conversation going on right now with Dan and Sharon over there. I think it's 6 o'clock too. So it's going to be a heavy load, but recordings and getting back and watching those again. So we'll do all of that for the community. All right, everybody, have a great night. Thank you all so much. It was so good to see you, and thank you for bringing your voices.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.